Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this library webinar today on conducting nearly painless literature reviews, which is part of our Advance Your Research series. Conducting a literature review is a multifaceted task. It requires you to learn a variety of new skills pretty quickly, process large amounts of information, and present existing scholarship succinctly. So from asking questions that are appropriate and well-scoped, and techniques for reading and analyzing articles, my colleagues John Cyrus and Nia Rogers and I, Erica Brody, are here to offer tools for managing the literature review process and hopefully making it painless. So people from across many departments across the university registered for this webinar, which is awesome. So we tried to include examples and resources from a variety of disciplines. However, you may not see your own research area represented. That's okay. The principles of literature review are common across disciplines. If you have questions about how the information we present applies in your discipline, you can contact your subject specialist at the library, and we're going to show you how to do that during the talk. A recording of the talk and the slides will be made available, so no need to furiously be writing notes. Feel free, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. We'll try to answer them during the presentation, or if need be, we'll just do them at the end. So let's look at our learning objectives for today. So after attending this program, you'll be able to employ strategies to help you develop a right-sized, researchable question that adds to the scholarly conversation. You'll be able to efficiently read a research article and document key concepts and information that you find from each article. And finally, you'll engage with tools that help you organize the literature you found to prepare to write your paper. So we can think of literature review as a process with these various steps. Plan or prepare. That definitely includes identifying and refining your research question. Then you move on to searching the literature, managing your citations, reading full text articles, analyzing the articles to identify the evidence they provide or the arguments they support. Then you'll work to synthesize your findings across articles, and then you'll write your review. So today's focus is on plan and prepare, read, analyze, and synthesize. So let's start with planning and preparing. So I wanted to start with a poll that I'm going to launch. And this is, why do you do literature reviews? Just to get a sense of who's in the audience. And I think you should be able to check all that apply. So you might even check all of them. Who knows? Got responses coming in very fast. You should be able to close the poll in like 15 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to share these results. Can you see them? So it looks like we have a lot of folks working on school assignments and research proposals, but plenty working on dissertations and manuscripts, as well as evidence-based practice. So that's great. We will address all of those today in this short hour. So moving back to the slides and the talk. So since we're going to review what you might want to think about for each of these types of reasons for doing a lit review. So if you're doing a school assignment, it's probably very focused. You probably have some expectations from your professor, so that can provide bounds and requirements to work within. This can be helpful sometimes, so you're not just sitting out there in the wilderness wondering where to go. If you're working on a research proposal or grant application, that's a little more narrow. It's important to find seminal articles and demonstrate your awareness of key scholars in the field. And very much you need to demonstrate how your research is going to add to the scholarly conversation. and possibly how your research is going to, improve the world and do something specific. So you might be working on a dissertation or a prelim. So that's where you're really trying to convince the audience that you know everything about the area that you're working on, everything that all the research that's come before. So you need to become familiar with a broad range of literature, and you're probably looking for more references. If you're working on the introduction and discussion sections of a manuscript, this is very targeted, right? This is focusing on the scope of the problem, why we should care, how research has addressed this in the past, what's the gap, and leading the reader to be interested in your novel approach. And then you're also going to want to situate your findings in the findings of previous research. Finally, if you're doing evidence-based practice for, say, nursing or medicine, teaching or engineering, or really any topic, the most important thing is to find highly credible evidence. Ideally, enough information to understand various ways to tackle the problems and to understand the limitations of available evidence in terms of methods and quality. So now that we've thought about why we're doing our lit review and the things to be concerned about, I like to think also about the size of your research question. So how big is the scope of your question? Some questions are really big, like how to reduce stress. That's probably too big for a single literature review. Some questions are probably too narrow to address with a literature review. They may be interesting questions, but they may not actually address a gap in the science. So a question like, does my pet snake reduce my stress level? Probably too small. Then we get to the right size. For example, which animals provide the most emotional support for their owners? This is a lot closer to the right size. So you might have a topic, stress reduction, and how do you move from that topic to a research question? So there's a variety of ways you can go. You could do some preliminary literature searches, see how other people are studying stress reduction. You could talk to discuss your ideas with a professor, a colleague, a mentor. You can ask these folks if they know about seminal or foundational articles in the field. Also, you can ask them about key authors in the field to see really what's been going on about stress reduction. So you might have your research question, and it seems to be the right size and appropriate for your project. So for us, it's which animals provide the most emotional support for their owners. But you'll probably still need to think about some related questions. You'll need to define emotional support and owners. That could be any number of different kinds of people. So you'll need to think about the characteristics of those owners. So for example, with emotional support, is that reducing the number of panic attacks, or is that reducing cortisol levels in one's bloodstream? And when we think about the owners, is it young people? Is it elderly people? And it could be people who live in a particular place. So we really have to flesh all that out. So one way to think about all these related questions is you could use a concept map. Another approach would be an idea board. These have been traditionally used in group settings, but you could certainly use this independently. And there are some online tools that can help. There's a couple for mind mapping to develop these conceptual maps, concept maps. There's something called MindMeister, that where you do need to create an online account, but you can create a few maps for free. MindMup is free as well. You can create a public map without even creating an account. So other people would be able to see it, but they'd have to have your specific link address. So that's unlikely. Excuse me. To create an idea board, Google has a tool called Jamboard that has electronic stickies that can be real fun to work with. Or if you're like me, you might go old school and just take out some pen and paper and maybe an eraser. So you have lots of options. And then we talk about having tools to break out complex questions into key concepts. This is really what's going to help you with your search. So there's two frameworks, PICO and PO. PICO stands for Population, Intervention, Comparison, or Outcome. And so that's great for an experiment. But if you're studying something that occurs naturally that you can't manipulate, you'd be looking at a population, an exposure, and an outcome. So these are very common in the health sciences. Excuse me. There's also a framework called SPIDER. That's called, stands for sample size, phenomenon of interest, study design, evaluation, and research type. So there's probably many more frameworks out there. We just wanted to provide these as an example. So as an example, for PICO, for our question, which I've narrowed now to which dog breeds reduce panic attacks in adolescents, our population is adolescents. One intervention might be golden retriever, and we might want to compare that to corgis. And the outcome is, of course, decreased number of panic attacks. So when you're thinking of planning and preparing for your literature review, it's important to remember who can help. Librarians, we can help you with developing questions and breaking them out into concepts. You've got your professors and your peers. You can even consider reaching out to experts in other departments or other schools. So you have lots of resources. So now I'm going to turn it over to John. So I've stopped sharing and he is able to share his screen.
All right, and I just need to kind of reconfigure all my Zoom stuff. Can you guys all see the slide that says search at this point, or can someone at least give me a thumbs up?
Yes.
All right. So my name is John Cyrus, as Erica mentioned, and I'm going to talk through kind of the middle portion of this presentation about a little bit about search, but also about reading articles, reading sources that you have for information, and then how to annotate them to start the process of getting them to be more useful to you in whatever product you're looking at. So whether it's for a school assignment or things like that. So we're going to talk for just a minute about the search process, but we won't spend a lot of time on this today, only because there are often so many specific questions that come up when we talk about searches. We're going to stick to commonalities, and I'll show you, of course, how to get help from librarians if you need it as you go forward with specific questions. All right, so regardless of the discipline that you're working in, these tips will help get you started with a search at least. So first, it's always a good idea to start from kind of a known, highly relevant source. And as Erica mentioned earlier, it's really important to start identifying as part of the scope of your project and the understanding of your question, seminal articles, recommended articles on the topic from professors, librarians, et cetera, that really help you build your understanding. But these come back again and are useful as you start your search process because one, you kind of have an ideal as to what would be the article that I'd like to turn up in my searches, but also you can identify terminology for building a better search and even references from that kind of gold standard article for citation chaining, which is the practice of kind of linking forwards and backwards through reference lists and citing articles to additional research. So having a place to start always helps because you don't have to start really from nothing. So you should also consider which sources match your question. So which discipline might inform your question other than where you're starting in the discipline. So many of us might be familiar with the kind of primary databases from our discipline. So for a lot of the health sciences and even beyond that, PubMed is the critical database. But for psychology, for instance, and for other social sciences, PsycInfo might be really good, or ERIC if you're into educational research. And there are others like America, History and Life if you're in the humanities and specifically history. So these are great places to start, but since more and more research is becoming interdisciplinary, or is at least informed by other disciplines, it's a really good idea to think about what those disciplines might be and how they might inform your question and what you take to your literature review. So for instance, a lot of the questions that I deal with span health sciences and in some other field like education or psychology. And so looking at more than one database is really critical for a lot of the people that I work with. All right. So additionally, we suggest you take time to brainstorm synonyms for your key concepts. I think this is one of the most critical steps in building a search that's any good. So you build on what you've learned from those key gold standard articles and think about then how you might capture the best cross-section of the research for the topics or the concepts that are of interest, right? And this includes thinking of not only exact synonyms, but what are acronyms that you use typically? What are technical terms or jargon in addition to widely accepted terminology to represent a concept, right? And this might differ by discipline. So one thing to think about is, like, does a construct or a phenomenon that you are familiar with in your discipline, does it translate one-to-one to another discipline, or is it often referred to as something else? You know, kind of more specifically, if you're thinking of the term dog therapy, right, to reduce anxiety, should you be using canine as well? Should you be using pet therapy or animal-assisted therapy? And it may differ depending on the source that you're looking at and depending on the database that you're working within. But taking some time to think about this and using that mind map that Erica referred to is a great way to really kind of ensure that you're going to get the best cross-section possible. So on this slide as well, we've linked to a literature searching worksheet that will help you walk through some of this process of not only defining your question and breaking out key concepts, but thinking of other terms that can be useful in creating a search for these things. There are also a few things to keep in mind when you're actually in the process of searching. So not just kind of leading up to it, but while you're working in the databases. And the first thing is that literature reviews and searching are highly iterative. And this is probably the main takeaway for me for a lot of interactions I have from talking with faculty and students about searching, is that it's not just a one in, get what you need and come out. So, you know, you think about the terminology that you go into a search with, it really may end up being insufficient or completely inaccurate. And when you try to capture that cross-section of the literature, you may kind of flounder because you didn't go in with the right terminology. But more than likely, you'll discover new terminology that will help you kind of refocus your search or open new avenues to explore. So I won't say that you shouldn't be, but try not to be disheartened if maybe your search doesn't go the way that you planned on the first try. So I tend to think of the search process as finding the right level of focus on like a pair of binoculars, a camera, or a microscope, and you don't know exactly where you're starting or where you'll finish, but you just have to keep adjusting until you capture like that image that you want to see. So two things that are the most common results when you're thinking of searching are either you get way too many results or you get so few that you don't know what to do with them. So whichever you get, try to make kind of rational, systematic decisions about what you're doing. So for instance, if your search is too big, are there other concepts related to the topic that you could bring in to help focus the search? Or are there ways of introducing like population characteristics or study design or date limitations that are reasonable that might help you focus the search? When you get too few results, there's really only a few things you can do, but that includes maybe taking a concept out of your search to broaden it, or discovering a new avenue through new terminology, or finding a way to verify that the small set of literature that you find is actually a true depiction of what exists out there. And that's one of the tough ones. Okay, so when you do get started or you do get stuck, reach out to librarians at VCU libraries. We have librarians assigned to work with pretty much every school department or program across VCU, faculty or students. If you go to the library.vcu.edu under About Us, there's a staff section. And one of the tabs is linked to here. It's just called Specialists, and it will identify the programmer to the department and the librarian for you to contact. And in case you feel hesitant about reaching out, this is part of our job. Okay, so let's talk about after you find some articles and how you start the process of reading and analyzing what you found. So I'm going to do an informal poll. So I'm going to ask a question, and I want you guys to type responses in the chat, and I'll try and read some of the responses for us to think about. So how do you read a research article? And this seems like a very broad question, but do you have a particular strategy for reading, or kind of an order of attack when you look at an article? And please just take a second, if you would, to type in the chat. Abstract first. Oh man, you guys were ready for this, weren't you? Abstract, abstract, abstract. I read the whole thing with a frowny face. All right. So some interesting variations here. I didn't ask whether this was students or faculty. That would be interesting to pull out. So a lot of you said abstract first, and then either the conclusions or the methods. And that's something I think that's really interesting and important to pull apart. Is it looks like that's the main abstract, discussion, methods, results. Yeah. Denise, I'm right there with you. That's my method too. Yeah, so this is great. And if you have a chance while I'm talking, look through these. This is give you a really good snapshot of the variety of ways that people approach reading articles. And it's really important that I'm going to make some suggestions, but there is not necessarily a right way that works. I'm going to try and make some suggestions about how to approach it that might save you time when you're reading not just one article, but a number of articles. Okay. So the first thing about it, I would say, think of the first reading of the article after you've selected it during the search process is kind of a preview. So looking at the abstract, as many of you already mentioned, what does it actually tell you? Helps you kind of reorient to the article that you may have seen in the search process, but it could have been, let's say, a while since you first saw that article. So you knew you liked it when you saw it initially, but you may not remember why. So reading through the abstract gives you that quick way to get in there again. So also think about how the paper or the source is organized. Are sections clearly labeled so that you can kind of go in and just get what you want? Or is it a block of text that you really have to spend some time reading through in order to be able to break it apart into different pieces? And this will help a lot in terms of annotation of the article at a later point. So also think about what's the thesis? What is their main argument? What's the objective of the article? And what is the author trying to do with this piece of scholarship? Again, this relates back to, does it still match your question? And how are you going to use it when you're kind of writing whatever product, an assignment, a proposal, or a discussion section? So finally, after you've kind of done this preparatory work, does it actually help you answer your question? And if so, how? So on kind of previewing the article again, after you've selected it, think about what was it that caught your attention? All right, was it the outcomes or the question, the objective of the article? Was it the methods? And is it still relevant to your question? All right, and so once you've kind of thought through this, you can start digging in a little bit more. All right, and consider, I want to say, that you don't have to read it from beginning to end without stopping. Right, you can go in. They're not going to tell on you if you don't read the article from first word to the last period. So think about, can I skim the background of the literature section? If you're in psychology, the literature review section can be super extensive. I'm just using psychology as an example because I've found many papers with 20-page lit reviews. So pick out what you need that helps you contextualize your work or add to your overall understanding without forcing yourself to read every word that's written there. It will tell you, again, how the author sees their work, and usually the objective of the current source that you're looking at, as well as kind of how they see it situated within previous scholarship, all right? And then, like I said, it should include the thesis or the objective. Sometimes it's easy to pick out and in a kind of predictable location. Other times it's not so easy, right? So also, as you're kind of looking through the article, identify the main evidence that they're going to be using to prove a point, or the methods that they're using to generate and analyze data. So once you understand the objective, it's then a lot easier to go through and pick out, okay, what are they trying to prove and how are they proving it? And in a well-organized paper, this might be skimming the methods section, right, for how they are trying to prove their objective, or looking at the body of a paper for key terms and kind of topic sentences of paragraphs, right? But either way, just trying to identify how they are moving through their argument. And then finally, considering potential sources of bias. And for scientific papers, sometimes this is a little bit easier because there are specific research standards, but you want to make sure that bias was taken into account when the research was designed, and also how it was implemented. And for other disciplines, you might have to dig a little bit deeper and consider, for instance, like how the theoretical perspective of an author influenced their interpretation. And in some cases also, you might have to consider who funded the work. The most easy, kind of the easiest example of this is in health sciences studies funded by drug companies, where people then go back later and question the results of the studies. All right, so we wanted to point out kind of a few broad ways to get into reading an article that didn't involve an A to Z reading, but also point you to some other examples from disciplines that you might connect to on a more one-to-one basis. This is not a cumulative or comprehensive list. If you have questions about finding resources, though, that are specific to your discipline or your program, again, feel free to reach out to a librarian. That's what we're here for, to help you find the resources you need. All right. So now let's take time to look at analyzing the material that you find. So everything that we've talked about up to this point has been focusing on your question, finding sources of information, getting back into them, starting the processing process, if I can say that, right, by reading them. And now we're going to talk about analyzing them. And specifically what we're going to talk about is annotation of these resources in a more effective kind of systematic way, right? And so after you've read through these articles, the next step, which can also be done simultaneously if you're really on your game, is to annotate the articles so that what you are seeing in the articles is useful in answering your question, okay? So annotation is really just a term that means describing the main characteristics or content of each article. And in my opinion, giving yourself a shorthand way to refer back to important articles later without having to go and reread the entire thing. My favorite example of this is before, I guess it was in grad school early on. I remember at one point sitting down at a laptop with papers literally spread out in a circle around me, trying to remember which one I wanted to cite where, having done copious note-taking on each one in paper. And so now I don't really do that so much. I don't have time for that. But so to make annotation process easier and to give you a product that you can come back to either later in writing or in revisions or just at a certain point to pick up where you left off, we suggest building a matrix or a table. And so in this phase of the process, you found these articles, and the unit of analysis for the matrix is the actual article itself, right? And the goal of annotation through a matrix is to pull out only the most useful information that you might want to access later so that you don't have to go back into the full article. So exactly what you want depends completely on your research question. And it may also look different depending on your discipline. So what we have on the slide here is just an example of kind of a generic matrix that you might use. In the health sciences, for example, you might want details about study design, the population, the outcome measures, but you also might want, in other disciplines, information about theory or conceptual frameworks, and the types of sources that authors are using to make their points. So regardless, the main point is to create a matrix that fits your needs and allows you to capture any specific characteristics of a paper, a few summary sentences, useful quotes, anything that will be useful later on in writing. I even go to the point of actually starting to paraphrase what it is I want to say about an article so that I don't have to make that cognitive leap from reading to writing at a later point. Okay. And if you have more than one question that you're interested in addressing, you can create a separate idea or separate area for each idea. And so that this also may mean that a single study or a single source might appear in kind of more than one part of the matrix as it fits your question. So as you can see in this matrix, all I've done is pulled out a few citations, written a really brief, like one-word summary or one-sentence summary of each article, pulled out a useful quotation that either describes the main findings or might be used as a quotation in an article later, and then given an example of how you might establish the quality of an article. And in this case, there's a scale called the Newcastle-Ottawa scale that's specifically for non-randomized studies that I wanted to use for all of my studies as applicable. So again, this is helpful to me, and I think it will be helpful to you guys in organizing the information you take out of a study, but also really tailoring it to what you need for that specific project, right? If you need every detail, put every detail in here so that you don't have to come back. So a couple of things to remember. Test the matrix on an article or two before you're kind of done with it so that you make sure it's both thorough and that you get what you want out of it so that you don't have to keep going back to revise it and going back to the articles to add in new information. Read the articles just enough to pull the information you need without worrying about too many details, but be willing to reread as you needed to be thorough without wasting effort. All right, remember the idea is to set yourself up for writing later. All right, and after you've annotated the papers that you found, it's always a good idea to go back to the original question and make sure that you've actually covered what you needed. I know that's happened to me quite a few times. So this is a very iterative process, even within this specific step. So you may at this point have to go back to search to find additional articles or sources that fill gaps that you see in the matrix and add them back in. And then once you feel like you've covered each question sufficiently, you can move on to synthesizing the articles that you've found for each idea. So right now we're annotating, then you move to synthesis. And Nia is going to talk in just a second about synthesis. All right, Nia.
You're muted, Nia.
I was muted. I did the thing. It's been 19 months and I still can't get it right. I apologize to everybody. Can y'all see a synthesis slide or synthesized slide?
Yes.
We good? Awesome.
Yep.
So here you are. You have all the material in the world. You have this fabulous table. You're done, right? That's it. Nothing else to think about. Just sit down and start writing. Not quite. We're not quite there yet. I wish, but not so much. Okay, first of all, let's talk about what a synthesis is not. It is not a report. Reports are boring. You will kill your readers if you force them to read a report. That is not a nice thing to do to your readers. Well, I mean, unless you have personal agendas. But generally speaking, we try not to bore our readers. It's also not a summary, right? This article says this, and this article says this, and this article says this. Never, never, never. You don't want to do it that way either. I want to urge you to consider very strongly paraphrasing as opposed to blocks of text. Blocks of text are not fun to read. There being one major exception, and that is if someone said something poetically, brilliantly, fabulously, and you can't paraphrase it equally fabulously, then it's okay to use the quote. Or alternatively, if it's a block of text that has specific meaning with its words. For instance, in my work with Wilder, a lot of folks quote amendments to the Constitution. You should use those as block text. You should not paraphrase the Constitution. That way lies madness and danger. So try to avoid that if you can. But if you can stay away from blocks of text, it's just not as interesting to read as how you paraphrase things. And then the last thing is articles that only agree with you. There is absolutely no reason that you should not include, and in fact, there is every reason to include the oppositional voice, which I will get to in a minute. But you shouldn't, if you already knew this much about the topic, it's probably not appropriate for you to be writing this project. What a synthesis is, however, is an academic conversation. So what you're trying to set up is placing known works in context with your work as you advance things. Academic work works in, or excuse me, discovery works in incrementalism. Nobody just comes out with a big giant discovery. We all build on each other's work. And the way that you do that is by having an academic conversation. So you want to bring in other people's voices and add it to your own. Yours is important here, so you should be putting yourself in the context with them so that you can have that discussion. You want to incorporate a variety of scholars and a variety of methods. Depending on which kind of subject you're doing, that will mean scholars or methods. It often does not mean the same, doesn't mean both. But bringing in those variety of voices helps move the discovery forward. It helps move all of the academic work forward because we're incorporating everyone's experience and everyone's point of view. And that's really important, which gets me to oppositional points of view. I don't like cranks, and I disagree with lots of people and they consider me a cranky person and who disagrees with them sometimes. I find that articles are made better when you point out an oppositional point and then answer it. When someone says dogs are the best animals for relieving stress and, and cats drool and dogs rule, right? If you're a cat owner, then it's up to you to point out the benefits of cats. But as a writer, it's up to me to say, but some people really respond to cats better than dogs. Or there are different things that those animals do, and bringing in those opposition voices help to build my argument. So it's really important, I think, that you include those in your literature synthesis. So then how do you organize your synthesis? You should be looking for threads, right? As you look back at your annotation block, you'll see threads, you'll see common themes in the literature. Hardly anything is going to stand out by itself, so you're looking for things that are coherent, you're looking for things that build on each other, and then you're weeding out the less useful materials. You're weeding out things that either don't apply to your topic, as John was talking about, or that are not, they're too tangential. A lot of times what happens, at least in my experience with research, is that you're going along and something interesting happens, right? You read an article and you're like, oh, now I'm going in this direction. Wait, now I don't know where I am. I'm lost in the wilderness and all I have is lots of articles. Okay, first of all, you're not lost in the wilderness. It's fine to backtrack and it's fine to circle around. It's also fine to change your mind, right? So keep that in mind as well, that you may hone your topic in ways that will change your mind a little bit about what you want to write. And the synthesis is going to be the part that shows you that. It's going to be the part where you try to put it all together and realize, oh, I really am more interested in answering X question than Y question. You may not figure that out during the searching. You probably won't figure it out till this portion of your writing or your organization. So remember this, that John just showed you this fabulous matrix for annotating. I love this. This is so now you're going to move from the article level to what I think of as the paper level or the project level. So now you're taking that first analysis, and hopefully you did it electronically. We love Erica with her paper and pen. I too am a fan of paper and pen. But if you do this electronically, and I see raised hands, yes, but if you do it electronically, it'll be easier for you to move things around. So we encourage you to do this as much as you can electronically. There's lots of Google Sheets, there's Excel, there's all kinds of stuff. But if you do it in paper, you might consider discrete paper like index cards, which would also let you move ideas around. That's very, very old school, but I'm very old school, so there you go. And either way, I encourage you to be able to consider that articles are going to be useful for more than one point in your project or your paper. So you're going to want to be able to make copies. You're going to want to be able to apply them in different ways. but you've already done all this work, right? You've already done all the work. So all you have to do here is organize it. And I'm going to encourage you, I'm going to say that the first thing that you should really do is build an outline. You should, and by outline, I mean just a rough A, 1, 2, 3, B, 1, 2, 3, C, 1, 2, 3 kind of outline, which allows you to not only place the material that you found into an organized flow, but it also allows you to figure out which kind of paper you're writing here. Are you writing a chronological paper, which shows patterns over time? Are you writing a thematic paper, which shows the topics and subtopics, right? That's when you have a lot of subtopics. It's good to go with thematic. Are you looking at methodological, where you're looking at how the difference in methodologies change the outcomes of the responses? Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a minute. Or are you looking at theoretical, where you're looking at how different theories can explain a single phenomenon? Once you figure that out, and that's part of what writing the outline is, then you can use topic sentences as sort of stand-ins for where you're going to put big blocks of text or paragraphs. You're just kind of using those to help yourself get a flow. These are not the only ways that you can structure a paper, but they're the more common ways. So here's the problems, because I always have to bring the problems, because that's my nature, is that I have to tell you what can go wrong, because my first master's degree was in Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, and we live for things that go wrong. So the first thing that can go wrong here is that you have an unbalanced amount of sources, right? So you have a section in your paper where you've got 18 sources, and then you've got a section in your paper where you've got 2 sources. That is not, you need to find balance. You need to either weed out your 18 or look for more for your 2, but having that kind of level of unbalance looks incomplete to the reader. So it's something you want to avoid. You want to avoid the Lone Ranger, right? The one person who wrote this one thing that you really like, but no one else on the planet has been able to prove it, agree with it, anything. I'm going to use my example here, my favorite example for this, and I'm old school, so some people won't know what I'm talking about, is cold fusion. There were scientists at at Brigham Young University who said they had discovered cold fusion. They had figured it out. And if you can do fusion at room temperature, you'd solve all the world's energy problems instantly. Like, that takes care of everything. No one could make it work, right? Something in their lab was special, and no one else could make it work. You're going to need to, trust what they say, but verify. Find other people who either are agreeing with it in terms of outcome, or who are in line with it, so that you can draw links between. But things that are just by themselves, not a good situation. Quality over quantity. You'll hear peer-reviewed thrown around a lot. In my world, there's also authoritative, which is another important quality level, right? The only people who can tell you how many people who live in the United States are the Census Bureau, or Census Bureau subsidiaries, sorry. Google can tell you that number, but Google got it from Census, right? It's a secondhand piece of information. You want to go to the authoritative source, and in that case, it's the Census Bureau. So that's when John was talking about sort of those main pieces of literature that you're looking for, that are the authoritative pieces of literature in your subject area. Some of them are going to be because they're peer-reviewed. Some of them are going to be because that's the source of all the studies that came after. And so you want to look at that one. Currency or dated material. If you are on the medical campus, this is especially important for you, right? Because medicine changes moment to moment. And so you want the most updated material. If you're writing about the ancient Greeks, it's probably not a huge amount of day-to-day discovery on that. So your dating material is probably not as concerning, but it is something to keep in mind depending on what topic area you're writing in. Is the currency or the dating of the material? So just keep that, keep an eye out for that. And then diversity. So I don't know if you've noticed, but there are some disciplines in which diversity or scholars of diverse voices are hard to find. And that is something that you want to do as much as you can to alleviate. You want to have as many diverse voices as possible. And in some cases, that's diversity in the authors. In some cases, that's diversity in the methods, right? It depends on what you're writing as to what that diversity is. But try to remember that the Academy has traditionally been a not very diverse place. And so seeking just in the databases, in the regular databases that we use, and not seeking outside those can sometimes lead you to real diversity problems. We are, by the way, having an AYR, which I want to go ahead and mention, on February 2nd called Amplify Marginalized Voices and Counter Structural Bias in Your Research and Scholarship. So if you're looking for more information about how to fix that in your scholarship going forward, come visit us on February 2nd. Last thing I want to mention is your entire project is an elephant, right? If you say to yourself, I have to now write my dissertation, 400 pages, and I need to sit down and write it now, all at once. I'm going to do all the research and I'm going to start writing and then I'm going to finish. You're never going to do that. That's not manageable. First of all, if nothing else, you need eating breaks and sleeping breaks. But also, you need to walk away from the material because it's better when you take breaks from what you're writing, which is why it's always a terrible idea to start the night before. But breaking it up into manageable bites helps you conceptualize each thing that you need to do, manage that, nibble away at it, and then move on to the next thing. Unfortunately, it's also a never-ending meal because there will always be new research. There will always be new things to discover. At some point, you're going to have to cut yourself off and just start writing. And that's also difficult and hard to do sometimes. So I appreciate that that's difficult, but it is something that you'll need to keep in mind that at some point you got to break it off and do it. But it's not going to all be done at once. If you want to contact us, this is our email. Not us as a group because we don't have a group email. That would be awesome, but we don't. But you can contact us individually. If you don't know who your librarian is, we can certainly help you find your librarian. We are happy to do that. We're happy to put you in contact with that person. And then there's a webinar evaluation, which I think they're going to also put in the chat. I think that link is going to be going in the chat.
Just did that just now, Nia.
Thank you. And just to mention, we do have some upcoming webinars other than the one that I mentioned. These are a good place to find out sort of information that your library is giving to you on a pretty regular basis. I think between all of the departments, we do about one a month. So there's lots of information for you to find about what we do in the library.
Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If there are any questions, we can take.
Yep.
Did we get a copy of the slide deck with the links?
That will be forthcoming in a few days. I don't know exact length of time, but it won't be super, super long. As will the recording with the transcription, if you need that. Thank you, Tyler. We love you too. The best part of, at least for me, the best part of my job is hanging out with students and working on their research projects, actually faculty and students, and working on their research projects. I don't mean to cut the faculty out because they have really cool stuff they're studying too. So it's fun to do that part of our job. We love to help. That's why we do this job.
Also, thank you guys for giving us your lunch hour.
Yes.
If this was indeed your lunch hour.
I see in the chat somebody asked about preferred citation tools. So we promote Zotero and Mendeley quite a lot. They're both free. Zotero is good at picking up citation information from websites in particular, so that's a great reason to use that one. They both have a lot of the same features, and John kindly put a link to our guide about citation tools so you can see the pluses and minuses of different ones. We know that people also sometimes are interested in EndNote. It's not free, and we, the library doesn't have funding to provide that to everyone at the university. But depending if you work in a small lab or something, you may decide that you want the added features of EndNote. I personally like to push people towards Zotero. Lots of great information sharing going on in the chat.
Yep, and agreed, Talisha is fabulous.
Yeah, Talisha works with everyone in health professions. So whether you're in gerontology or another program, she works with all of the different programs, which is a lot to do, but she does it.
And I just want to reiterate again, we do really like to hear from you. We'd love to get your questions, not just because it's our job, but this is what we most enjoy. So never hesitate to contact us. You're never bothering us.
John, are you able to grab a link for the research guides? The generalized
That's what I was
page?
working on.
Awesome, thank you. So almost all of the librarians have created research guides in their subject area. Thank you, Julie. And so that link will take you to various subjects, and when you click on the subject, it will tell you who your librarian is to the left side of the page, which is also a nice shorthand way to see people outside your discipline. You can go to their discipline page and look at their links. Exactly. Yes, because while we're active, we're probably not active at 2 a.m. most of us. We want to be respectful of people's time, so if you need to go, we're welcome. You know, we're really glad to have had you, and we're glad you stayed. Thank you so much for visiting with us, and we hope you come to another AYR.